This is a series of videos in which Philip Maris interviews Dr. John Ricketts, the author of the book Exceeding the Goal: Adventures in Strategy, Information Technology, Computer Software, Technical Services, and Goldrat's Theory of Constraints. So John, what can you tell us about the relationship between Agile and the theory of constraints or constraint management? Also, a similar question, I guess. How does constraint management or theory of constraints apply to software development?
To understand what constraint management says about software, let's start with the Agile method, because it's the dominant software development approach nowadays. And rightly so, because it addresses shortcomings in the previously dominant software development approach called waterfall. With the older method, there would ideally be no rework, but in fact rework was common, which made projects lengthy and unpredictable. With Agile, requirements are discovered and refined through rapid iterations, so rework is reduced, schedules are shorter, and results are more predictable. Waterfall delivered software only at the end of the project. In contrast, Agile delivers software frequently, so the initial software may not be complete, but it's delivered much sooner, and at any point thereafter, as the iterations unfold, the software delivered with Agile will run in production. There are about 40 distinct Agile methodologies in use today, and their differences have led to controversies. Some of the adaptations to Agile make it manageable on large, complex software projects, and that's drawn fire from Agilistas who prefer a leaner form of Agile. Agile is not a constraint management application, but Agile principles are consistent with constraint management principles. And despite its wide use, some frustrations with Agile can be understood by looking at software projects from a constraint management perspective.
Tell me, where can the constraint be in Agile projects? In developers, in testing, elsewhere? I mean, in the physical world, which I know well, of manufacturing or project development of new products and stuff, it's often, for instance, in testing or quality control. Is that also the case in Agile projects?
Because developers are generally the least available resource type from the job market, developers are most often the constraint on an Agile project. But staffing decisions easily shift that constraint. For instance, if the testing role is understaffed, the constraint shifts there and work in process piles up after development as untested code. Developers may promote their code into pre-production environment, but reviewers on mission-critical systems may hold up the promotion of those changes into production because stress testing and penetration testing are awaiting specialists. Likewise, business conditions can shift the constraint. Users may have little to no availability during their busy season. When the constraint shifts to users, the buffer of prioritized work items ahead of developers gets depleted. Now, developers never really run out of work because there's always a maintenance backlog, but developers may resort to gold plating by implementing low priority work items just to keep busy. In manufacturing and distribution, where constraint management originated, it advocates stable constraints because floating constraints are much harder to manage. And the reason is the buffer moves. That advice applies to Agile projects too.
But where's the buffer if you're applying the Agile way to your projects? And you also want to integrate constraint management.
Once you've identified the constraint on a project, you can proceed to examining the buffer. Recall that the purpose of a buffer in constraint management is to isolate the constraint from variations elsewhere. If the constraint on an Agile software project is developers, then the buffer is all work products upstream from development. If the constraint shifts to another role, then the buffer is all work upstream from that new role. For instance, if the constraint slips from development to testing, then all code under development or promoted to the test environment becomes the tail end of the buffer.
What about the mechanism for triggering work, John? What in the theory of constraints or constraints management is often referred to as the rope. How do you decide when to launch work and replenish your buffer?
Having identified the constraint and understood where the buffer is, another piece of the constraint management puzzle involves the signal that triggers replenishment of the buffer. In the case of Agile, functional requirements are captured in user stories. So when the number of user stories in the waiting for work stack drops below what would keep developer busy for the next iteration or two, it's time to replenish future work items. And if the product owner hasn't prioritized future work, replenishment includes that prioritization. And if the sponsor hasn't funded future work, replenishment includes that funding. Thus, the buffer is everything preceding the constraint and the signal to replenish the buffer needs to cover all the steps prior to the constraint.
So why does constraint management or the field constraints matter to Agile? How can it help? Does it help avoid bad Agile or full Agile, I think you call it?
Faux Agile, as it's sometimes known, refers to domination of Agile by managers with limited technical background and different objectives from the technical staff. Agilistas advocate a return to the Agile Manifesto. Thus, some frustrations with Agile can be traced to factors that constraint management recognizes as performance inhibitors, and that recognition can be used to improve the process. Here are some examples of performance inhibitors. Conflict between the sponsor's vision, that is business benefits, and the user's priorities, which is oftentimes to make their work life easier. Conflict between managers and technical staff, role ambiguity and understaffing, unstable constraints, careless buffer management, including omission of signals to replenish, and finally, weak or late signals for replenishment.
Okay, great, John. Thank you very much. Now we've seen how the 5 areas in which constraint management can help an Agile environment.